Hey, welcome to Crossroads. One of the executive orders on the election is now coming into focus again because Republicans are saying that it's equivalent to what Mark Zuckerberg was doing with Zuckbucks, only this one is through Joe Biden. It was an executive order that Joe Biden actually passed a few years back, but now it's just again coming back into the scenes because, well, the election's right around the corner. This executive order on the elections is being scrutinized right now, and you may have heard of it. Critics are referring to it as Biden bucks, like Zuckbucks, right? It's a play on the Zuckbucks word from the 2020 election. That was when, of course, Meta founders, Mark Zuckerberg, had this program where he was funding all these, get out the vote drives, but he was accused of doing it in such a way that would benefit Democrats more so than Republicans. And that's one of the big concerns with what this, again, all of government program that Biden created is going to do as well. Now, look, on paper, it's a voter registration initiative, this new one, but its involvement of a huge number of government agencies, in fact, over 600 government agencies are involved in this. It's like an all-of-government program. It also has strategic plans that are blocked from public release. Even if you file a FOIA request, they will not give them to you. And there's also partnerships with left-wing organizations. In fact, analysis has shown that none of them are conservative, all of them are left-wing, all but one are Democrat. The only one not being Democrat is, of course, Green Party. And there's accusations that it overrides as well state boundaries on elections because there's a debate right now over how much the federal government can control the elections in states because under the Constitution, the elections are managed by the states. And all of this is, of course, stacking up to make this program very deeply controversial. On the Biden side, he's doing it based on racial justice and, voter access and things like that. Now, this goes back to Biden's 2021, quote, executive order on promoting access to voting. Now, recently, a wave of Republican officials are saying they're going to refuse to follow it, meaning that even though it's an executive order, some of them might just not cooperate. The Federalist said this. They said, throughout the past several weeks, Secretary of State Mac Warner of West Virginia and Michael Watson of Mississippi have warned about the effects of quote-unquote Biden bucks and the effects they're going to have on the 2024 state and local election administration. They say that the infringement upon states' ability to operate elections free of federal interference prompted Warner to adopt a policy in which his office will, quote, refuse to accept voter registration forms collected by federal agents. And notes that Warner cited Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, which stipulates that the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. And notes that Watson told the Federalist last week his office will be adopting Warner's approach as well. So this model set forward by Warner of West Virginia is the model being adopted at least elsewhere in one state. But important on this as well, Congress is now calling for hearings on this. They're rolling out more investigations on this, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about it. Now, what do they have to say on the other side? Well, this is the statement from Secretary of State Andrew Warner in West Virginia first. I want to show you as well what Biden is saying, but let me show you what the letter says. This is the official letter he sent. It notes that in March of 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14019, the EO, right, Executive Order, which they say improperly claims it is the responsibility of the federal government to expand access to and education about voter registration and election information. It goes on to require every federal agency head, again, like not even joking, like 600 of them, to design plans related to voter registration, ensure access to certain incarcerated individuals in federal custody. It's actually a very large part focused on getting people in prison who were previously in prison or who are on parole to actually register to vote. And it notes that it also designs a ballot tracking system for absentee voters under UOCAVA. A big part of that notably is for military. And so when, of course, people serving in the military, oftentimes at bases overseas or not in their home state, they will send in absentee ballots. They're creating a system to manage and track that as well. Now, it notes there is no such responsibility enamored in the U.S. Constitution, and the 10th Amendment clearly states that powers not expressly given to the federal government by the Constitution are reserved to the states. Which is true, but of course there's a lot of debate around state rights versus for the expansiveness of the federal government. Now look, it says that after waiting a year for the White House to explain the EO executive order's legality and implementation, Secretary Warner led a coalition of 14 other secretaries of state and sent a letter to the White House calling on the president to rescind his unconstitutional directive. And this is what they say on the legal grounds. Let me show you this, then of course I want to show you what the actual executive order says, and you can judge for yourself. This is how Warner is arguing it on the Constitution. He notes that Article 1, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, again, says the times, places, and manner of holding elections shall be left to the state legislatures. He notes that West Virginia will emphatically not give up our state's duty to register voters in a nonpartisan manner to the federal government, nor will we accept voter registration forms collected by federal agents. White House overtaking of state responsibilities is something we will fight all the way to the Supreme Court, they're saying. He notes as well that in addition, another constitutional argument, he says that Section 7 of the National Voter Registration Act the Voter Registration Act says states, not the federal government, shall offer voter registration opportunities. The White House knows they are prohibited from self-assuming power over the state's voter registration processes and say that Biden's EO executive order is federal overreach. This executive order is nothing more than another attempt by the White House, again they say, to take away states' powers, federalize our election, and turn voter registration into a partisan activity. Of course, these are the concerns. He notes that voter registration should be an apolitical service by individual states. Briefly on that, one of the technicalities, of course, from the Biden executive order is that actually it replaces some of the previous, voter acts, meaning that they're actually not technically violating those old acts. They're actually replacing them with this executive order. The problem they're having with that is, of course, it's an executive order, meaning that it's a decree basically from the president, which bypasses Congress. Normally, when a law is passed, if it's going to be stable and sturdy, it has to make it through the House, the Senate, and then the president signs it. Biden bypassed that process by making this an executive order. And based on that, actually, challenging it will be a lot easier for the states, although it does stand technically as law as an executive order because Biden, of course, signed it. What you're going to see now, though, is the pushback because, again, it's not stable based on that. Now, the letter that this individual refers to, Warner from West Virginia, it has as well 14 secretaries of state also signed on with it. And so, again, this is not just one state pushing back. This is several, and actually the number is growing. These states include Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, Ohio, South Dakota, Tennessee, West Virginia again, and Wyoming. And so these are the states actively pushing back on the executive order currently. Not a majority of states, but again, you can expect this to expand, especially as investigations go underway. Because as I mentioned, Congress at the federal level, right, they're also looking to hold hearings on this. And so you're going to be hearing a lot more about this. And very likely the headlines are going to be something along the lines of either Biden bucks or Biden tries to federalize the elections. That's the way very likely this is going to be framed. And on the other side, you're going to hear it as, voter access gets challenged by Republicans, or they're going to say that, anti-discrimination voter act is, pushed back by Republicans. You're going to hear it on those grounds. Now, this August 3rd letter to President Biden was pretty simple, and here's what the representatives had to say in it, again from the states. It says that, Dear President Biden, as the chief election officials for our respective states, we ask you to rescind Executive Order 14019. They say that our United States Constitution provides, again, the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives, and they say shall be prescribed by each state by the legislature thereof. But the Congress, they say, may at any time anytime by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. Briefly on that. What they're laying out, of course, is the difference between federal reach and state reach. Of course, under the Constitution, it is the job of the states to set the time and location and so on around the elections, when they hold them and how they do it. Technically, Biden could argue this executive order doesn't override that because they're framing it as more of like a get out the vote initiative. It's a voter registration initiative. The other problem, though, is that changes to election laws, again, have to be approved by Congress. And because this is an executive order, it bypassed Congress. Although an executive order it looks similar to legislation because it's, again, pushed out in the same manner. But by bypassing that process, they actually do have a pretty strong case. They note in the letter that as the supreme law of the land, the Constitution clearly states a state legislature shall, emphasis added, they said, prescribe the way elections are run, and that if any adjustments need to be made, such adjustments are the province of Congress, not the executive branch. The executive branch, of course, being the office of the president. Therefore, they say Executive Order 14019 was issued without constitutional authority nor congressional approval, as I mentioned. They note that Executive Order 14019 calls for federal agencies to develop plans that duplicate voter registration efforts conducted at the state level and ignores codified procedures and programs in our constitutions and laws. Again, because you have state constitutions as well, not just the federal constitution. They note that involving federal agencies, again, more than 600 of them, folks, involving federal agencies in the registration process will produce duplicate registrations, confuse citizens, and complicate the jobs of our county clerks and election officials. And they say that if implemented, the executive order would also erode the responsibility and duties of the state legislatures and their situational duty within the election clause. Now, it's a fair point, frankly. It was an executive order again, which means it was able to bypass Congress. And if you go by the Constitution, that's not quite how it works. This also represents a law that directly impacts the states, which of course means the states may have an easier time challenging it, and they are saying they're going to take it to the Supreme Court. Already there's 14 states strongly on board, and again, you can expect it to expand, especially as Congress at the federal level begins doing their investigations, which they have just now started. But, is it really unwarranted? Well, let me show you what the actual executive order says, because, it's fair, right? This is what the White House passed. This was signed by Joe Biden. This is the official document. They say that the right to vote is the foundation of American democracy. Free and fair elections that reflect the will of the American people must be protected and defended. I don't think anybody have a problem with that. But the details are what's important, right? They say, but many Americans, especially people of color, confront significant obstacles to exercising that fundamental right. They say these obstacles include difficulties with voter registration, lack of election information, and barriers to access at polling places. They say that for generations, black vote. This is Biden saying it, not me. He says, for generations, black voters and other voters of color have faced discriminatory policies and other obstacles that disproportionately affect their communities. These voters remain more likely to face long lines at the polls and are disproportionately burdened by voter identification laws and limited opportunities to vote by mail. Biden says in the executive order that limited access to language assistance, meaning people don't speak English, right, remains a barrier for many voters. People with disabilities, they say as well, continue to face barriers to voting and are denied legally required accommodations in exercising their fundamental rights and the ability to vote privately and independently. They note as well that members of our military serving overseas, as well as other American citizens living abroad, also face challenges to their exercising their fundamental right to vote. Now, further in, and stick with me because I'll go into this, further in it states, It is the policy of my administration, this is Biden saying it, of course, to promote and defend the right to vote for all Americans who are legally entitled to participate in elections. It is the responsibility of the federal government, and this is where you're going to hear a lot of arguments. They say it's the responsibility of the federal government to expand access to and education about voter registration and election information, and to combat, they say, misinformation. What does that mean? In order to, Biden says, enable all eligible Americans to participate in our democracy. Right. Now, I won't go over this whole thing word for word because it's pretty long, but basically, let me just kind of explain what it says. It lays out the claim that current voter registration systems are discriminatory. It claims, again, right? They say that black and so-called, voters of color are unable to properly access the election systems. It alleges that things like lines at the polls, you have to wait in line, or voter ID laws, or other things like this, they say these are barriers specifically to black people and whatever people of color are, right? I assume they just mean not white people, but I'd argue that they have color too. We're not living in a colorless world. It notes that under the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and others, that the federal government has a, quote, key role in remedying disenfranchisement and unequal access to the polls. And so Biden's executive order notes that the federal government should partner with state, local, tribal, and territorial election officials, meaning this is like a whole of government effort run by the federal government, meaning, as conservatives are saying, that they believe this is a federal takeover of the election systems, to expand programs to, quote unquote, eliminate discrimination and other barriers to voting and expand access to voter registration and accurate election information. Again, there's two sides to this, really. One of the big ones is a voter registration initiative. There's actually a lot of details to that, which could even lead to problems like, for example, universal mail-in ballots and, again, the federal government's control of that entire system. There's also the issue of what they define as accurate election information. Some people could argue, for example, that it may be just the time and location of where to vote. You might remember that there were some people making internet memes back in the 2016 elections that, were joking about, Hillary Clinton and telling people to vote in the wrong places. One guy actually went to prison for that. Again, they're like joke memes. But again, the Democrats have framed that as a type of election misinformation that may have damaged voter out-turning, right? They want to, on one side, make sure that people are given the proper information on where to vote and so on. The concern with this is that it will also go into narratives and so on, right? If they claim, for example, that, if you talk about the integrity of the 2020 election or the narrative of January 6th and so on, things that do impact perceived information over the legitimacy or lack thereof of one candidate or another, that it may affect your vote. The concern is that if they try to regulate that will be, again, who decides what truth is on that, right? It's different from maybe telling you where to vote versus telling you basically how to vote. So we don't yet have the details on that. But back to the program, it basically rolls out a large-scale program as well for voter registration and applications for people to vote by mail. It's a massive, vote by mail initiative as well. It also has programs where agents of the federal government can assist people in completing this process, meaning they'll actually work with individuals. And it expands this to include what it says are, quote, nonpartisan third-party organizations. And this is going to be one of the really, really important part, because the actual wording of the executive order specifically says nonpartisan third-party organizations. They're NGOs. And analysis of these NGOs shows that none of them are nonpartisan. They're all Democrat. In fact, all but one is Democrat tied. The only one that's not is Green Party, suggesting, again, this is not that case. It's groups like the ACLU and stuff. But they want to have them work on programs, on agency premises, working directly with the federal government on this. And it also directs the head of each agency, again, 600 agencies involved with the federal government, to submit a strategic plan, they call it, on this. And In fact, those are even blocked from public release to an extent, which I'll get into. And as it goes on, it also includes systems to ensure that military ballots are tracked and secured, and that voter systems for all needed languages are in place. There's voter registration programs for people in prison, on probation, or who are formerly incarcerated, and so on, right? Now, look, on its surface, you could, depending on where you stand, it might sound nefarious or not. I think if Trump did something like this, Republicans may support it. If Biden does it, they may be wary of it, and vice versa, right? It's basically a massive system for voter registration and voter outreach on paper. And it gives orders to all 600 federal agencies to be part of this. But, there are problems with this related to how we saw similar programs on the private level playing out during the 2020 elections and other things as well. For example, like Mark Zuckerberg and the Zuckbucks initiative, which this sounds very similar to. That said, they'll be talking about this more after a quick word from our sponsor.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Under a 2021 executive order, a large-scale voter registration program was launched by the federal government to drive what they say are voter registrations, right? Now, look, on its surface, it doesn't sound too nefarious, depending on which side of the aisle you're sitting on. It's basically a massive system for voter registration and voter outreach to go against what they claim was, election misinformation and racial justice. They want to have racial justice by doing this. Now, it gives orders to all 600 federal agencies to be part of this. This is an all-of-government initiative run by the White House, overriding, of course, to an extent, some of the state rights on elections. But there are problems with this related, again, to how we saw similar programs playing out at the private level during the 2020 elections and other things as well. For example, Zuckbucks. Again, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg and his initiative to, again, do very similar things, get out the vote initiatives, voter registration. And it turned out, based on some of the accusations and legal analysis, that Zuckerberg's program was carrying out those initiatives in such a way that it would have given a significant benefit to the Democrats and would not have benefited Republicans as much, meaning it had partisan use in the end, or at least a partisan effect. That's one of the concerns with this Biden initiative. Now, the Heritage Foundation also noted some of these potential issues. They did a full report on it back in 2021. And here's what they had to say. They say that it would federalize and micromanage the election process administered by the states, imposing unnecessary, unwise, and unconstitutional mandates on the states, and reversing the decentralization of the American election process, because basically this federalizes the elections. They say this is essential, again, the decentralized process, to the protection of our liberty and freedom, according to Heritage Foundation. They note that it would, among other things, implement nationwide the worst changes in election rules that occurred during the 2020 election. This institutionalizes some of the problems we saw in the 2020 elections. And notes that we go even further in eroding and eliminating basic security protocols that states have in place, meaning the federal government can override some of the security protocols they claim at the state level. And also, they say, interfere with the ability of states and their citizens to determine the qualifications and eligibility of voters, ensure the accuracy of voter registration rolls, secure the fairness and integrity of elections, and participate and speak freely in the political process. Some real concerns there, right? Now, of course, Heritage Foundation comes from the conservative side of this argument. They accuse the executive order basically of federalizing and of micromanaging the election process. And it's by controlling the election systems to that extent that it also changes the otherwise, again, decentralized nature of the American election system, which again gives a lot of power to the states. It could be argued the program is in place to remedy some of the concerns of the 2020 elections to, secure our elections. But as Heritage notes, it institutionalizes a lot of the systems people felt were problematic last time. Universal mail-in ballots and concerns of, partisan get-out-the-vote programs from things like Zuckbucks, Mark Zuckerberg's program. Now, normally, when there are concerns, that's where transparency comes in. If there are people worried about something, there's investigations. If we believe there might be a problem with something, we might ask them about it. We might make phone calls. We might even file a FOIA request if it's a government agency. And when groups try to find out, what was in this strategic plans, what are the agencies actually saying that are part of this program? Because briefly as I mentioned, the executive order states that it requires every federal agency, 600 agencies, to submit what it calls strategic plans. While groups that requested those strategic plans were surprised to find the documents were heavily redacted. The text was blacked out, so the public could not see what was actually in them. You could not read a lot of the documents, and in fact, they even denied some of these from public release, claiming that the public is not legally allowed to get it. They say it's exempt from these FOIA requests. Now remember, under the executive order, all these federal agencies had to submit strategic plans to the White House. And an organization called the Foundation for Government Accountability, they went and found out themselves. They filed a request to the Department of Justice for its strategic plan back in September of 2022. And here's what a few of those documents look like. This is what the actual reports look like. You can see a lot of it is redacted. You can see that a lot of it is blacked out. You can't read it. And even beyond that, some of it was even just denied entirely. Now look, to be fair, some of the redacted parts are names and emails, things that they would always redact because they don't want people emailing them or doxing them or whatever else. And some other parts are allegedly duplicate materials. But I think, frankly, if it's duplicate, why not just show it? And it would eliminate some of the concerns. But there's also a lot that's just plain old undisclosed, stuff they're refusing to release. And this is, of course, raising some questions over, why is something that's allegedly just a voter registration program so secretive? Why do they care? If this whole thing is just about a get out the vote initiative, it's to make voter access better and better inform the public, why are they being so secretive about it? Why are they trying to hide information from the public? Why do they care? If there's nothing to hide, why hide it? Now here's what the Foundation for Government Accountability had to say about it. They said in their official note on those documents they got that on July 12, 2022, the federal district court sided with their organization because they had to sue to actually get them and ordered the Department of Justice to provide all documents required to be disclosed under FOIA law. They note that in September 2022, DOJ, Department of Justice, finally disclosed 135 pages of documents, a far cry from the more than 5,500 potentially responsive records which DOJ had initially claimed it had. You get that? There's 5,500 potential documents from the Department of Justice on this program, and when they were sued under FOIA and forced to release it by a court, of those 5,500, they only gave 135 documents, meaning the overwhelming majority of the documents on this are secret. And that's just one of the 600 federal agencies, by the way. Now, they say that as expected, most of the documents were heavily redacted, even the ones they got. And they say to date, DOJ, Department of Justice, has steadfastly refused to turn over its 15-page strategic plan, the main thing they wanted, to carry out the executive order 14019 from Biden. And they say that the DOJ complains that plan, the strategic plan, is exempt from disclosure under FOIA, and that releasing it would only, quote, confuse the public. Both claims this organization says are false because How can an organization of the government be exempt from FOIA? Now that raises some real questions. Why would a voter registration program like this be exempt from disclosure under FOIA laws? You can FOIA the FBI. You can FOIA any government agency. And, usually it's a very difficult process to put it together because this is one of your legal rights in this country. They have to give it to you. And so why is it that something that is so simple on the surface, just, again, a Get Out the Vote Act, so secretive? And now, in fact, how could federal agencies be exempt from FOIA at all, for that matter, let alone something that shouldn't be controversial in the first place? And why would releasing it confuse the public, right? If it's something so simple, hey, we want to get people registered to vote, why would that be confusing? We still don't know the answers to these questions. And frankly, this is all very strange. The other issue is the NGOs. These are mentioned as partners in the program, and this is going to be also a really important part in understanding this. I'll be going in depth into this, though, and how the federal election program is being compared to Zuckbucks. That'll be only on epochtv.com, though. It's our uncensored streaming platform. So if you want to watch the rest of this episode, plus all our other exclusive content, click the link in the description below or in the live chat. And before we jump briefly, my new documentary, Weapons of Mass Migration, comes out tomorrow. And this is a very important documentary. This documentary will show you the actual process, speaking of things being withheld from the public, the actual process that your tax dollars are financing to facilitate mass migration into the United States. Not just programs running the buses and running the amnesty programs and running the free food and free housing things, but also the programs facilitating the movement of people going all the way through Latin America. Your tax dollars are running this program. And in this documentary, I'll show you exactly what you're funding unknowingly. It's a very important documentary that has potential, I think, to change the entire discussion we're having over illegal mass migration. Click the link in the description to watch it. Again, it comes out tomorrow, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Let me show you the trailer before we jump.
An unrelenting stream of immigration. Non-stop.
According to statistics, around 7.2 million illegal immigrants entered the United States under President Joe Biden alone. They have United Nations facilities here, and the people pushing this are leading people to their deaths.
To what extent is the United Nations facilitating the border crisis?
They're throwing rocks!
They're being overridden by international powers.
We are not authorized to talk.
It is a humanitarian business now.
And they said, oh yeah, these are the debit cards. We're giving these debit cards to the immigrants.
Why all the cloak and dagger? Why are we being so stealthy about this?
Some of these people have gone on record and publicly talked about this, people close to Barack Obama.
It puts 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters.
I've been researching, of course, what's happening, but I want to know why it's happening.
We'll see chaos on a global scale until America is extinguished and the power shifts completely to the east.